Hey, Walks here, Osmosnomoto. I'm up at our favourite coffee outdoors place in the hills of northern Thailand. Echo's sitting there in the shade, wisely, reading a book. And I thought I would take the opportunity to just talk a little about the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 at 10,000 kilometres. Alas, I've left it a little bit late for that because I've been riding it so much, it's now at 12,000 kilometres. We've got quite a bit of experience with the bike. So here is a 12,000 kilometre review of the Royal Enfield 450 Himalayan through the eyes of Walks and Echo at Osmosnomoto. We'll start off with the pros, and that's pretty much everything about the bike. The reason we bought this was we wanted something that was big enough for two people to carry luggage in comfort, whilst also to be able to explore the trails of Thailand, of which there are plenty. So what we really wanted was a true ADV bike for adventure riding. And that's what we got. Out of the box, it's almost ready to go. As I think everybody knows, it comes with the protection bars around the fuel tank that you can strap a couple of these, they're called Wolf Moto bags. I've got first aid kit, I've got tools in here. I did put some pannier racks on. I wanted to have soft panniers. We wanted to be able to carry some luxuries like our chairs and a stove for brewing up coffee in the hills. So I put the racks on. They cost about 4,000 baht in Thailand, genuine Royal Enfield, which is about £100. So I suppose these days, what's that, 110, 120 US dollars. I put the handguards on, 3,000 baht, about 100 US dollars, 80 pounds. They're the genuine Royal Enfield ones. Obviously they fit really well, ideal. I did put some different levers on, but not because it needed it, because I just had the chance to get them. And likewise, the gear lever, didn't need it, just got it at a good price, so I put it on. And that's it. The panniers, there's a video about the panniers, so I won't talk about those too much. Excellent, I've really enjoyed them. 12,000 kilometres, very sturdy. I'll put a link in the description below. The only other thing that I've really done is remove the footrest rubbers. When you take the rubber off, you've got a bigger patch under your foot, which is nice. There is vibration through the footrests, a high frequency vibration at certain revs, but you've got that with the rubber and without the rubber in my experience. So take them off. I think it's just as comfortable and you've got a bigger platform for your foot. The fuel consumption on the bike, I think, has been quite acceptable. When I'm on the road, sort of mostly a road journey, it's doing around about 31 and a half kilometres to the litre. If I'm mostly on the trails, it's doing about 27 and a half kilometres to the litre. The tyre wear from the standard Seat tyres was pretty good. I bought the bike at the beginning of the rain season, so I didn't intend to go off-road much. So I thought I'll leave the Seat tyres on, use those, and then when the dry season comes and I'm going to be in the hills more, I'll put on some Michelin Anarchy Wilds, which I recently did. I changed the tyres at about 11,200 kilometres. Took the Seat tyres off. The front one, I would have said, was pretty much at the UK legal limit. The rear one still had some life in it. Surprisingly, the front had worn more than the rear. Conversely, the brake pads, the front brake pads at 12,000 kilometres have still got a reasonable amount of life left in them. The rear brake pads need replacing, and the reason I find that quite strange is I am not a particular rear brake user. I'm more of a front brake person. Even on the steep downhills on the dirt roads here, I predominantly use the front brake. The rear brake disc is pretty much dinner plate size, so I guess that's partly to do with it. Changing the tyres, I like to change my own tyres because if I get a puncture in the wilderness or on the side of the road, I carry tyre changing equipment, puncture repair kit, spare inner tube. I've got a centre stand. I like to change my own tyres so that I keep my hand in. The rear wheel was really easy to get in and out, easier than our Honda CRF 300 Rally. Tyre was easy enough to fit. It did take a bit of persuading to get the Michelin Anarchy Wild onto the bead. Just a bit of extra lubrication and some good old sturdy pumping and it was on. Replacing the wheel was pretty straightforward. The front wheel was easy to do. The only thing is, and this is standard with, I don't think they're all like it, but it's not a fault. If you take the front wheel out of your Himalayan and when you go to replace the wheel, you find the fork legs are at different lengths. Page 92 of the manual explains that's how it's supposed to be. One of the fork legs has got oil in it, the other one hasn't. The other one's got the spring in it. So one does the damping, one does the boingy springing. And it seems that for that reason, I think it's the right one goes longer than the left one. So you have to pull the right fork leg up to get it lined up. In here, I carry a strap that I can use to do that. A strap's always good to carry. You might need it to tow out if you get breakdown with a friend or whatever. So I carry straps anyway. When I put the wheel back in, I need to put a strap under the bottom of the fork leg, over the top of the fork leg or the bottom yoke, and just get them the same length. Other than that, it's an easy enough job to change the tyres. Reliability wise, there's been one problem. We went to England for 6 weeks, I think, came back and went to start it. It did start, but the battery was a bit low. It was struggling to turn over. Got it going, used it for a week or maybe 2 weeks. It did keep working, but obviously the battery wasn't what it should have been. So I couldn't be bothered to go through the hassle of a warranty claim. I just went to a nearby shop in town, got another battery, put it on, and it's been good as gold ever since. But that's it. It's not let me down, touch wood. Let's hope it remains that way. One of the, I would say, biggest faults, which is a fairly trivial thing, the indicator lights on the dash, they are not lights, it's a TFT dash, and they're at the bottom. So they're not bright, they don't really flash at you, they blink at you, and they're at the bottom, so you don't see them. So it is very easy to leave the indicators on a Royal Enfield Himalayan or any Enfield with this instrument cluster. Talking of the instrument panel, we've got this Tripper dash on it. Some people love it. Trevor from Ride with T did a video, a very good video on how to use it. He used my bike and my phone, and he loves it. He was all over it. He thinks it's great. Personally, I think it's rubbish. I won't go into much detail. I'll put a link to Trevor's video. Have a look at that and see what he thinks. For me, I mean, connecting the phone to the dash, that's problematic. Once you've connected it and you're using it to navigate, it's Google Maps. If you stop and restart, 50-50 whether it's going to reconnect again. The whole thing's not good. It relies on Google Maps. You can make a route using an app such as Curvature. You can download the GPX file. You can then load it into the Royal Enfield app and it will pop up on here. But the problem is Google Maps reinterprets it. If you go off-road, Google Maps doesn't like the look of part of your route, then it reroutes it. So I've not spent much time on it. I've not looked into it much. I'll say no more about it. I recently had the 10,000 kilometre service, no problem. Everything seemed to be fine. I couldn't actually ask the mechanic how the valve clearances were because he'd gone for lunch, but I looked at the bill, I noticed there was no charge for shims, so I'm assuming that they were still in tolerance. As a side note, and this is more of interest for anyone living in Thailand, Chiang Mai Royal Enfield did the valve clearances. They did everything. I found Chiang Mai Royal Enfield to be professional setup. There's a lad there called Coco. He speaks good English. He's great. He was really helpful. The only problem was actually scheduling the appointment, but that's a Thailand thing. Anyone that lives here will understand. But once I got the appointment scheduled, it was great. So if you live in North Thailand and you need a service with anything doing like the valve clearances check-in, nip over to Chiang Mai, go for a ride, Mae Hon Song, Pai, that kind of thing, whatever. So to sum it up, I think the Himalayan it's a great bike. I've said since I had it, if it said Honda on the fuel tank, it would be perfect. And what I mean by that is the availability of parts and the reliability. So far, these have got a great reputation for reliability. Anyone interested in Himalayan 450s has probably seen Fuzzy Biker on YouTube. You've seen that he's done 100,000 kilometers without any issues. I don't think that Honda have got a bike that competes with this, the CB500X or now the NX500. It doesn't have the off-road presence of this. A friend of mine has got a CB500X and one of these, and he pretty much said the same the other day. I think if you're in the market for an adventure bike that can take two people, that can take luggage and still handle the dirt and the trails, then this is great. Thanks very much for watching. We do have a few more videos about the 450 Himalayan. There's one comparing it to the CRF 300 Rally, riding on the dirt roads with a friend recently. There's a couple about the saddle, the original unboxing and fitting of the saddle, and then subsequently a 3 month later review on the Rally seat compared to the original seat. I've got a video about these panniers made in Thailand. They're really good. I'll put a link to all these videos in the description below. Thanks ever so much for watching, and we'll have another video soon. Cheerio for now. How's that? Single take?